This is Generation Space, the official podcast of Air Force Space Command. Last time, Master Sergeant Dave Salinitri talked with Les Johnson of NASA and Dr. Joel Mosier, Chief Scientist at AFSpace, about where we're going in the decades and centuries to come. Now that conversation continues, along with some pro tips on innovation. Welcome back to Space Futures.
Something that I kind of struggle with a little bit is in the military. A lot of times we're so conditioned to check boxes. To like let's accomplish our orders and let's move on to the next thing. But I don't. But then I hear you speak, and you get so excited, and you're so creative, and everyone you work with is so creative. How do we help our airmen? And this might be more of a question for you, Doctor. How do we help our airmen who wear this uniform say, "Hey, we hear the CSAF talk about bringing innovation and new way." And sometimes you take the business model, and you throw it away, you completely do something different. How do we get our airmen to be thinking about this stuff, where even the A1C or their second lieutenant could come up with ideas and think where they could help with this vision here?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. And innovation is a tricky thing. You can't just tell somebody to innovate. You can't just innovate on command.
People tell me, hey, make a video that goes viral.
That's right. There you go.
Okay, let me work on that.
Yeah, when you figure out how to do that, let me know.
Give me a cat and a baby or something like that. Those go viral.
Yeah. But there is, a school of thought, and business leaders believe this too, that if you spend a small amount of your time organizationally, just a couple or 5% of your resources, that's some of your time, some of your money, thinking about the long-term future, just like we talked about these 8 potential futures. If you have in your mind what you want the future to be, what you think is a positive future, what you want to drive towards, then that will stimulate all kinds of innovation, because you have your horizon set far enough out that you're thinking about new ways to do things that will drive that. And that's kind of why we did the Space Futures Workshop, and that's kind of why we're here talking today, is to get people out of today's problems, thinking about the challenges that we have to face today in space or anywhere else. And those are important. You can't forget about those. You have to address them. But a small amount of your time, just think about, well, what if the future looked like this? Or how do I want the future to be? Then innovation will be just sort of a natural byproduct of that. And so everybody should spend a little time thinking about the future.
Well, and I think part of it is it's hugely a leadership issue, in my opinion. Because I think people naturally innovate. I mean, how many times have you undertaken a task and you think about it and you think, wouldn't it be more efficient if I did it this way? Or wouldn't it be helped if we did this? If you're not given the freedom to go to your supervisor or to your commander or whoever and say, I have an idea, without fear of being summarily dismissed if you're not here to think, right? Then you won't, and that innovation won't happen. And so if leadership effectively communicates, not necessarily you go innovate, but it's okay to innovate. And if you come up with a new idea, the door will be open. I think that's how you'll get that to permeate your culture.
So our enlisted leader of the Air Force, Chief Master Sergeant Wright, he talks about the frozen middle, and the frozen middle being that middle supervision that kind of acts as another layer to prevent these great ideas coming up from our airmen, and that frozen middle prevents it the ideas going up to our leaders. And he says that cannot exist anymore. I feel that's a little bit of kind of like what you're referring to is that.
Well, I've heard that in organizational leadership books called the sludge layer.
All right, that's maybe where
Chief slog your way through that to get things up or down. And I think that's common to a lot of organizations, not just yours.
Okay.
I think it's out there, and I think it's something that's a challenge for those top leaders to change. And a lot of organizations have been successful, some not so much. But I think it's really important. You've got to let that communication flow both ways and get through that.
Yeah, so like you mentioned being around a little bit, having a couple of, I haven't been around and I still have that hairline. But so what were some of the better organizations you worked with where you saw where just creativity and innovation was just like breathing air? It just came natural and it's successful and it's like a.
Well, I've been very, very lucky. In fact, I think I've led kind of a charmed career in that my whole career at NASA, I've been involved with innovators. There are a lot of projects I've worked on where I've been able to carry to fruition and test some pretty innovative space propulsion ideas, things like an electrodynamic tether where you use the Earth's magnetic field for propulsion and you don't require fuel, a solar sail that reflects light to travel where you can get more propulsive thrust per volume than any other rocket or propulsion system. And none of those ideas were mine, but I've been open to and have worked with some really smart people, and I've been able to figure out how to get their ideas to come to fruition. And so for me, I have been very lucky. I have worked in an innovative subculture within NASA that has fostered that basically most of my career, and I've been very, very lucky in that regard.
I've heard some of my peers, like in the video production world, they talk about different companies that they say, hey, at lunch, go out, take a 2-hour lunch, not just an hour, and maybe have a beverage, have a drink, an adult beverage with you. We want you to relax and enjoy where you're being. What would be your pro tips to maybe the leadership to kind of help foster that creativity, that environment? And what would be your tip to the person at the foundational layer, the tactical layer, to start, I don't know, I don't want to say maybe an exercise, but how would you encourage them to be able to be in that mental space to be able to come up with those ideas? So one for the leadership and one for like the tactical airman.
Yeah, so industry has figured out these things as well. There's a book called The Google Way talking about how Google grew their innovation base, and it was doing just what you say.
Mandatory nap time.
Letting folks let their minds wander, give them some relaxation time to push things that aren't necessarily the important things on their plate, but maybe they have a seedling of an idea and they can go spend some time developing that or pushing that. And I think that's important in the Air Force and any organization, is to give folks at least a fraction of the time to think through some of these seedling ideas. And a lot of times the person that comes up with a really crazy, wacky idea, we tend to think, well, this guy's, he's crazy, this can't be the case. But later on, when we adopt their idea and we realize that was pretty good, we always call him, that guy was ahead of his time. He was a man, he had great vision. So you have to allow folks to get past that crazy idea stage and move on to something more practical. And that's, I think, all throughout the organization, we need to give time to that.
I think we also, for me, I would give very tactical advice. And that advice would be to everybody in the company or the organization. We know you're going to think about process improvement. You're going to go home frustrated with some process knowing you have a better way to do it or some widget or some idea. Find the people in your organization that are more senior than you that have been successful at doing that process. Find those people and talk to those people and network with those people, because they will help you figure out the system. Every organization has its own culture, its own system, right? There's a NASA culture, there's an Air Force culture, there's an industry culture that varies from company to company. And there are people who are successful in getting their ideas forward. What you need to do, if you're one of those people who has an idea but you don't know what to do with it, you can take it to your management. Maybe you'll have receptive management, and you should do that. But you should also look for those people through talking to people over coffee or at lunch. Hey, who does what? Go talk to those people, even if they're not in your branch, your organization, network. And that's how you get things to go forward. That's been my experience.
So that's awesome. I like that advice. One of the things I've heard, there's a stereotype, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and hey, that they're up there in age. They can't be creative. They're old. Here you are, experienced, and you're
going to tell me I'm old, right?
No, I said experienced. Let the record show I said experienced.
Okay.
No, and it seems like creativity just comes very natural to you. What would be something you would say tell someone who's maybe in a funk right now, and they're struggling to be creative, to solve problems? Give us a little step into your world.
Wow. I guess this thing I would agree with Joel is you can't tell somebody to be creative. But if this person is frustrated because they have been creative and they aren't being heard, they need to be a little bit introspective and ask two questions. Am I not being heard because the people are in the sludge layer and they don't want to hear me? Or is it because my idea may not be a really good idea? Who do I trust to give me feedback that can honestly tell me whether this is a good idea or not. And I think so everybody needs to ask themselves all the time that question. I ask myself that question when I come up with something. Oh, maybe I have a good idea. Before I float this with anybody, I'm going to go talk to this person and see what they think, because they give me pretty good advice.
Trusted counsel.
Trusted counsel. And I think that's really important at all layers. And I think when you get to be senior, one of the things that has stuck with me for a long time, my father-in-law was a charter NASA engineer. He started at NASA when Von Braun was there, and when the Marshall Space Flight Center began, he was with Chrysler Aerospace and became a civil servant and worked there.
You have a history here.
Before he passed away, he died at age 89, almost a decade ago. I was talking to him at age 88, and he was mentally still there, still creative, was designing a new heat exchanger for his house. And he said, Les, in here I'm 18. And I think that we don't want to forget that at all layers of management, that just because you're more senior or otherwise, there's still a kid in there, right? And if you bring up the right topic, I've seen the most staid, conservative, stick-in-the-mud managers get excited about things if you bring it to them the right way. And because it all comes down to relationships and people and communications. And that's why I think my advice has consistently been, and you've heard this, the idea is good, but it'll go nowhere unless you get it heard. So you got to learn how to communicate, talk about your idea. You got to learn how to write about it. I tell our engineers, publish papers, get your story out there, write whatever you can. Learn how to pitch it to people who have 5 minutes to make a decision, get to the salient
like
points.
commanders, yeah.
Well, I mean, people get off on their own rabbit trails. They get so in love with their technology that they can't take it to the salient point if it's going to help you solve this problem. And unless you can do that, you're not going to get the attention of your commander, right? And so I think this whole networking of people is the most important thing some innovator can do to get their idea heard.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And to follow on with the networking piece, we talked about early in this podcast that the reason space was sort of held back is because launch was very expensive and it was just a hard thing to do. But a lot of other technologies have grown over the last many decades. We have this exponential increase in the rate of change in technology. So a lot of other fields have developed things that haven't yet been applied to space. And I'm thinking along the lines of artificial intelligence, biotechnology, just about anything you can think of is ripe for moving into space. So that's where networking comes in, is talking to people from other industries, other areas, and figuring out how the things that they've been successful at here on Earth, how do we apply that in space? And I think there's a lot of hay to be made along that line. So.
That's awesome. Is that where you see like the next couple of years going, trying to figure out how to make that money?
Absolutely. So for example, artificial intelligence. A couple of weeks ago, we watched SpaceX launch 60 satellites all on one launch, and it's an amazing thing. And they're on their way to launching 12,000 satellites. Well, that's a lot of satellites to operate. So you need to have some autonomy. You need to have some artificial intelligence to helping keep those things from flying into each other and doing their mission. So there's big opportunities to just take a lot of the new knowledge and learning that have come out of the autonomy community and apply it to space. And there's a lot of other examples just like that.
Well, in my field, one of the things, I'm a bit of you kind of gathered this by now, I'm a bit of a dreamer, right?
Yeah, no.
And so my vision for the human future is to go to the stars. And so when I had that cool job title of interstellar propulsion research, right, I was looking at how we would build these really big laser sails or solar sails to reflect light, and it required things that we laugh at today. How do you engineer something that's thinner than a human hair, 99.999% reflective, that's the size of the state of Texas, which is the kind of stuff it's going to require to go to another star. And so I did some calculations about how strong the material would have to be to withstand the forces, and there was nothing. Well, in 2004, some scientists at the University of Manchester in England discovered a material called graphene.
I use it in my golf balls.
Okay.
Callaway.
And I looked at graphene and its fundamental properties, and it's here. Yeah. That's the material we need, okay? Now, we don't know how to make it in big sheets. We don't know how to engineer it into these big sails. But that is a huge step toward making this project of our grandchildren to develop someday a reality, is that the material itself is no longer unobtainium. It's here. We just have to learn how to engineer it into what we want it to do. Now, we still need breakthroughs and big lasers and all these other things, and I'm not saying it's here, but those breakthroughs are happening also. And we need to have people looking at that big picture, figuring out how to spin in some of these innovations that are coming from fields that are totally unrelated to what we do that will help us enable our vision for the future.
I just finished reading a really good book on this subject. It's Nothing Like It in the World by Stephen Ambrose, and it's really the history of the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. And so in the 1850s, people were saying there's no way you could lay that much track. You could get across not one but two mountain ranges and have a railroad from here to there. People just said that's just too hard. There's just not the technology to get there. People are saying that, but we did. And people are saying that today about getting to the moon and Mars. It's just too hard. There's too much there. But we can do it. It's amazing what the technology spirit can develop if we think big along these lines. So those kind of big thoughts are awesome.
That's exciting. So we'll start. We'll get close to. We'll start to kind of wrap it up a little bit. But one thing I was curious to hear from each one of you. What's the next thing that we should be looking for? What's the next milestone? What's the thing that you're paying attention to that's going to get you excited that you want to see someday soon in the next year or 2 years on the news? What's that next thing?
1 to 2 years. Well, I think you hit on it, and that is a return to launching astronauts that are Americans to space from American soil on American rockets. I think in the next couple of years is the big milestone I'd like to see. Near term.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and I would love to see some of these industrialists have continued success in getting things happening, more reusable launches, moving some industry out to space, having some venture out to the moon, potentially. All of these things are within the scope of what industry is planning to do, independent of the government at this point. And the more that happens, the better it is for us because we can take advantage of those things. Those are big deals.
We'll start to continue with the wrap up. I know we've talked about a lot. Is there something we've not talked? Is there something we maybe have omitted that you would like to maybe speak about, or is something you just maybe want footsteps when that's on your heart? You just want a foot stomp or whatever it may be.
You could get me going for hours. I guess my takeaway would be that that we really do have this optimistic future, and individuals matter. I think people have a tendency to think, well, what does my opinion, my idea count in the big structure, the big organization? And my answer to those people is look at history, and individuals do matter. Individuals can change the course of a company, an industry, of everything. Look at Steve Jobs. Look at Elon Musk. Look at leaders that we've had in the military. And so, you do matter, and your ideas do matter. And if you're passionate about space development, your ideas could matter and make a difference. So don't let anybody ever tell you they don't. And that would be the takeaway I would have.
Pretty good takeaway. I like it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, we're at an inflection point right now. There's a lot of new changes happening in space and Air Force Space Command, and there's a lot of opportunity with change. And we just need to be mindful of what we want the future to be, because ultimately the future we get is the one that we develop towards, that we drive towards. So now is the time to make those decisions. We need to keep the future in mind. We need to think beyond our current problems, and good things will happen.
That's great. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank both of you for taking the time out of your day to be here and to speak with us and to speak with our audience. We hope we can get you on here again sometime in the near future. So,
thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Well, that's it for this episode of Generation Space. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to next time. All right.
Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment because we need your input. Also, don't forget to share Generation Space with everyone you know. We've promised it since the beginning, and now it's happening. This summer, we're going on the road to talk GPS-3 Space Vehicle 2, which is launching soon. Generation Space is a production of Air Force Space Command Public Affairs. The Generation Space theme is by First Lieutenant Tyler Whiting. Our audio engineer is Jacob Mosolf. Our video producers are Staff Sergeant J.T. Armstrong and Dave Grimm. And our producer is Second Lieutenant Kristen Shimkus. For more info on Air Force Space Command, visit our website at www.afspc.af.mil. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for supporting the airmen who aim higher. They used to say the sky's the limit, but for us in space, there is no limit.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Oh, we'll try again. Great start. Yes! Nailed it! Yes, crushed it. Promote now.